You're listening to the Valley Current.
Usually when we talk about a high-stakes legal showdown, there's this expectation of suspense.
Right, yeah.
Like a movie.
Exactly. You picture the cinematic version of justice, the dramatic cross-examinations, the sudden objections.
The gallery gasping at a surprise piece of evidence.
Yeah, all of that. And as an observer, you think that all of this performative energy is actively swinging the pendulum of justice back and forth in real time.
Like it's actually changing the outcome right then and there.
Right, but what if it isn't? What if you were watching a multi-billion-dollar courtroom showdown, complete with all those theatrics, only to discover that the trial was mathematically and, well, legally over weeks before the jury even sat down in their chairs?
I mean, it really forces a complete paradigm shift in how you view the legal system.
It totally does.
Because when you reach the absolute highest echelons of corporate litigation, the real war is rarely fought in the spotlight.
Where is it fought then? It's fought, and usually concluded, in the procedural paperwork, long before opening statements. Everything else is just the dust settling.
Wow. And that hidden architecture of the law is exactly what we're unpacking today. So welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We're looking at the historic Musk v. Altman trial, currently taking place in the Northern District of California. But we are looking at it through a completely different lens than the daily news recaps.
Yeah, no media circus today.
Right, none of that. We've got a fascinating, incredibly detailed legal newsletter from Computer Law Group. It's authored by their managing partner, Jack Russo.
And it is extremely thorough.
It really is. It focuses on the events of day 4 of the trial, so specifically Thursday evening, April 30th, 2026.
Right.
But it bypasses the drama to show us the structural reality of what's actually happening. So our mission today is to uncover the hidden architectural cage of California law.
Specifically, its unforgiving statute of limitations.
Yes, and a few quiet pretrial rulings that are quietly dictating the outcome of this mind-boggling $150 million case.
And Russo's newsletter, it's a masterclass in reading that architecture.
It really strips away the emotion.
Exactly. It looks strictly at the cold mechanics of civil procedure.
Now, before we get into the weeds of those mechanics, I need to make a very clear, very explicit statement to you, the listener.
Yes, this is important.
Today, we are going to be discussing an intense legal and corporate battle. It's filled with accusations of betrayal, strategic framing, and, heavy maneuvering between Elon Musk and Sam Altman.
A lot of heavy maneuvering.
Right. But we, as your hosts, are completely impartial here. We are not taking a side.
Not at all.
We're not endorsing either party's actions, and we are certainly not making any moral, ethical, or business judgments on the underlying disputes between these two titans.
Precisely. Our role is strictly analytical. We're simply reporting on and analyzing the legal mechanics, the strategies, and the factual timeline.
Exactly as they are presented in this provided source material from Computer Law Group. We are treating this as an exercise in understanding high-level litigation, nothing more.
So let's set the physical scene.
Yeah, lay it out for us.
It's day 4, April 30, 2026. The stakes are almost hard to comprehend. We're talking about a $150 billion damages demand.
That number is it's insane.
And just to add a layer of wild complexity to this, the proceeds of that demand are slated to go to OpenAI's charitable arm, since Musk obviously no longer funds it.
The sheer scale of that is staggering. $150 billion completely eclipses the GDP of many nations.
It eclipses almost any standard corporate dispute in modern history, really.
Right. And according to the newsletter, Day 4 delivered all the fireworks the media could possibly want. You had testimony about corporate looting. You had genuine laughs from the gallery.
Yeah, lots of decisive rhetorical blows landed by the defense.
Exactly. Elon Musk concludes his intense cross-examination, and then his associate, Jared Burchell, takes the stand.
And the newsletter states point blank regarding the daily scorecard, and this is a quote, "Round 4 goes to Altman. Decisively.
Decisively. But here is where Jack Russo completely pivots the narrative in his analysis. And this is where the true deep dive begins.
Right, because he argues that despite the intense drama of day 4, this case has actually been doctrinally over since April 17th, 2026.
Wait, April 17th? That's almost 2 weeks prior to this testimony.
Exactly. The trial theatrics, the witty retorts, the dramatic pauses on the stand, Russo describes them as post-decisional.
Post-decisional?
Yeah. The actual framework of victory or defeat was poured in what he calls pre-trial concrete weeks ago by the presiding judge, Judge Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers.
So the courtroom is functionally a stage play performing a script that's already been finalized.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
I am trying to wrap my head around that. It feels a bit like watching a controlled building demolition.
Oh, sure.
By the time you see the explosions and the dust clouds, the actual structural integrity of the building was severed hours ago by engineers with cutting torches in the basement.
Exactly. The collapse is inevitable. You're just watching gravity do the paperwork.
Right. But what actually severed the structural integrity of this case, because the newsletter points out that even though the judge built this procedural cage earlier in April, it was Musk himself who provided the specific admissions on the stand during day 4. Yeah,
admissions that essentially lock the door from the inside.
Right. So what did he say?
Well, it comes down to 2 highly damaging admissions elicited during cross-examination. And the first one revolves around a deeply controversial practice in the AI industry known as distillation.
Okay, let's dive into that first major courtroom moment. You have this high-powered defense attorney, William Savitt. He's a partner at Wachtell.
Right. Very prominent firm.
And he's cross-examining Elon Musk. Savitt flatly asks Musk a very direct question. Did xAI, which is Musk's own artificial intelligence company, use distillation on OpenAI's commercial models to train its own AI system, Grok?
And Musk is cornered. He answers with a single, highly consequential word. Partly.
Just partly.
Just partly. He tries to contextualize it immediately, of course. According to the AP and Reuters wires cited in the newsletter, Musk follows up by stating, "It is standard practice to use other AIs to validate your AI."
Oh, I see.
But from a legal perspective, the damage was irreversible. TechCrunch reported this as a remarkably rare public acknowledgement of distillation by a major U.S. AI leader.
Let me stop and define this for a second, because the technical mechanism here really matters for the listeners.
Yeah, it's crucial.
For those listening who aren't deeply entrenched in machine learning, distillation essentially means taking the outputs, the highly refined intelligence of a massive, incredibly expensive AI model.
Right, a model that costs billions to make.
Yeah, and using that generated data to train a smaller or newer AI model. You're essentially siphoning off the homework of a trillion-parameter behemoth to teach your own startup's algorithm without doing the foundational computational heavy lifting.
It's a huge shortcut.
So I get why that's controversial in the tech world, but legally speaking, in this specific trial, why is admitting to that practice so devastating to his overall case?
Well, to understand the legal devastation, we have to look closely at Musk's core liability theory.
His foundational narrative, basically.
Exactly. The whole reason he brought the lawsuit in the first place.
Yeah.
His entire posture in this case rests on the concept of open source betrayal.
Right, right.
He has presented himself to the court and to the public as a betrayed altruist. A philanthropist who donated millions of dollars to a nonprofit strictly dedicated to developing open source AI for the benefit of humanity.
And his claim is that the nonprofit got greedy, closed its doors, hid its code, and chased commercial profits.
Precisely. He is essentially suing to act as the enforcer of a charitable trust.
So he's entirely wrapping himself in the moral high ground. Like, I funded an open utopia and you corrupted it into a closed corporation.
That's the exact narrative. But the moment he admits to using distillation, meaning his own company, xAI, is actively siphoning data from OpenAI's closed commercial models to build his own competing product.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that entire narrative violently shatters. The framing shifts entirely.
He's no longer the betrayed donor.
Right. He is suddenly reframed as a direct business competitor who is actively extracting immense commercial value from the very closed weights product he's ostensibly suing them for creating.
Oh, man. It completely strips away the white hat.
Completely.
And the newsletter brings in some staggering broader business context here that makes this competitor narrative utterly impossible to ignore. xAI isn't just some plucky little garage startup anymore.
Far from it.
The newsletter notes that following a merger in February 2026, xAI is now officially the AI unit of SpaceX.
Right.
And the combined valuation of that massive entity is roughly $1.25 trillion.
It gets even more tangled than that, too.
How so?
During that same Day 4 testimony, when Jared Birchall took the stand, the cross-examination surfaced the fact that xAI had reportedly made a $97.4 billion bid to purchase OpenAI's intellectual property.
Okay, wait, let me make sure I'm synthesizing this correctly. You have a trillion-dollar competitor trying to buy the intellectual property of the company they are simultaneously suing for $150 billion.
Which is precisely why William Savitt wanted that single word, partly, on the permanent court record.
I have to push back on this, though. I want to test the strength of this defense strategy.
Sure, go ahead.
Musk says right there on the stand, it is standard practice to use other AIs to validate your AI. Let's assume he is completely right.
Okay.
Let's assume every single tech giant in Silicon Valley uses distillation. If it's completely normalized industry practice, why does this specific admission legally compromise his lawsuit? Does standard practice not offer a shield here?
Well, in a standard breach of contract case, standard industry practice might be highly relevant. But that is not what's happening here. Because of the nature of the claims, Musk is bringing specifically breach of charitable trust and an unjust enrichment. He's operating in what the law calls equity.
Equity.
Yeah. When you go to a judge seeking equitable remedies, you're essentially bypassing the strict black and white letters of a contract and appealing to fairness.
I see.
You're saying to the court, what they did was fundamentally unjust, and I need the power of the court to right this moral wrong.
Okay, so he's asking for a fairness ruling, not just a technical contract ruling.
Exactly. And because of that, equitable claims are governed by ancient maxims of law that date back to the English courts of chancery.
That sounds intense.
It is. And the most famous of these maxims is, he who comes into equity must come with clean hands.
Clean hands?
Right. It doesn't matter if distillation is standard practice in the tech industry. It matters that it completely undermines the equities of his specific legal argument.
Right, because he's acting hypocritically.
Exactly. He is asking a federal judge to punish OpenAI for closing their models to seek profit, while he is simultaneously in his capacity as a trillion-dollar competitor, benefiting commercially from the fact that those models are powerful and closed.
Wow.
You cannot seek equitable relief to destroy a system that you are actively exploiting for your own corporate gain.
That makes profound sense. It's like you can't sue someone for baking a cake the wrong way while you're actively caught eating a massive slice of it.
Precisely. It destroys his moral standing in the eyes of the court, which is a fatal blow when you're relying on equitable relief.
Okay. But as damaging as the distillation admission is for his narrative and his clean hands, the newsletter makes it crystal clear that it's actually the second major admission he made on day 4 that triggers the truly inescapable legal trapdoor.
Oh, absolutely.
And this one isn't about equity or narratives. This one is entirely about the clock.
Yes. The distillation admission damaged the persona. The second admission utterly destroyed the timeline.
Let's examine this second major courtroom moment. Wachtell is pressing Musk on the stand about a very specific historical document.
A very crucial document.
It's a 4-page term sheet dated August 31st, 2017. Sam Altman had forwarded this document to Musk, and this wasn't just like a casual let's grab coffee email.
Not at all.
This term sheet included a $10 billion fundraising plan and explicitly outlined the mechanics for converting OpenAI into a for-profit entity.
Which, crucially, is the exact action Musk is suing them over.
Right. So he's handed this document on the stand, and under oath, Musk testifies, and I am quoting the newsletter here, "My testimony is I didn't read the fine print, just the headline. I was reassured by Sam Altman and others that OpenAI would continue as a nonprofit."
Now, on a purely human level, that sounds like a very reasonable, relatable excuse.
Yeah, I trusted my business partner. I didn't read every boring page of a dense legal document.
Most people listening have probably clicked accept on a terms of service agreement without reading it.
All the time.
But under the unforgiving reality of California civil procedure, uttering that sentence on the witness stand is the equivalent of a self-inflicted legal gunshot wound.
I want to dig into exactly why that is, because honestly, if you told a jury of average citizens, hey, my friend looked me in the eye and promised me everything was fine so I didn't read the dense legal PDF he attached, a lot of jurors would probably sympathize.
They probably would.
So why does the law react so aggressively to this?
To understand why it's a fatal error, we have to explore a massive, unyielding pillar of California law. Jack Russo refers to it in the newsletter as the jolly line.
The jolly line.
Yes. This is the foundation of California's discovery rule, and it stems from a deeply influential 1988 California Supreme Court case called Jolly v. Eli Lilly and Co.
I don't want to gloss over a case name. What actually happened in Jolly that made it such a cornerstone of California law?
It's a tragic and fascinating piece of legal history. Jolly involved a woman who suffered devastating health effects because her mother had taken a defective drug called DES during pregnancy.
Oh, that's awful.
It is. The plaintiff knew she had been injured by the drug for years, but she delayed filing a lawsuit because she didn't know exactly which specific manufacturer had made the pills her mother took, as there were many companies producing it at the time.
Makes sense.
But when she finally sued, the court threw her case out because the statute of limitations had expired.
Wait, they threw it out even though she didn't have all the facts about who to sue?
Exactly. And the Supreme Court of California used that case to cement a deeply plaintiff unfavorable standard for the state.
Wow.
The discovery rule is the concept that determines when the countdown clock starts ticking on your deadline to file a lawsuit.
Okay.
In layperson's intuition, you might naturally assume the clock starts when you finally gather absolute proof that you were defrauded.
That feels like common sense.
Right. But California's Jolly Standard emphatically says no. It does not wait for proof. The trigger that starts the clock is merely suspicion.
Just suspicion.
Just suspicion. Jack Russo quotes the Jolly decision directly in his analysis, and it is a stark, unforgiving standard. The court wrote, "So long as a suspicion exists, it is clear that the plaintiff must go find the facts. She cannot wait for the facts to find her."
Cannot wait for the facts to find her. That places an immense burden of investigation on the victim.
It does. And California jurisprudence gets even stricter.
How does it get stricter than that?
The newsletter layers in another vital precedent, the Mangini standard from a 1991 case. Mangini establishes that this is not a subjective test. It is an objective one.
Meaning what, practically?
Meaning the court absolutely does not care if you personally were suspicious. The rule operates on a reasonably prudent person standard.
Okay, so hypothetical average person.
Yes. Mangini states, subjective suspicion is not required. If a person becomes aware of facts, which would make a reasonably prudent person suspicious, he or she has a duty to investigate further and is charged with knowledge of matters which would have been revealed by such an investigation.
Let me make sure I'm grasping the weight of that phrase. Charged with knowledge. That means if a normal, careful person would have raised an eyebrow, the law treats you as if you already possess every single piece of evidence that a team of private investigators could have uncovered, starting from the day you should have been suspicious.
Precisely. You are legally deemed to know the facts, whether you actually bothered to look for them or not.
That is brutal.
It is. And just to completely dismantle Musk's excuse that he simply trusted Sam Altman's reassurances, the newsletter brings in a 1983 case called Miller v. Bechtelkor.
What did Miller establish?
Miller proves that even if you have a fiduciary or highly confidential relationship with someone, even if they are a trusted partner looking you in the eye and telling you everything is fine.
Like Altman allegedly did.
Right. If you have outside objective reasons to be suspicious, you cannot legally rely on their reassurances to pause the clock. Suspicion, plus a failure to investigate, equals your lawsuit being permanently time-barred.
Okay, I want to try a mechanism-based analogy here to see if this crystallizes it.
Go for it.
It sounds to me like California law treats legal suspicion exactly like a smoke detector in your house.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
And the statute of limitations clock is the fire. Once that smoke detector beeps, you are legally required to get out of bed, walk into the kitchen, and actively check for a fire.
Exactly.
You cannot just lie there in bed, text your roommate to ask if everything is okay, have them reply, "It's nothing, just burnt toast, go back to sleep," and then try to sue them 5 years later when the house finally burns to the foundation.
You really can't.
The law says the moment you heard the beep, the clock started on your responsibility to act. By testifying, I didn't read the term sheet, Musk is literally admitting under oath that he held the smoke detector in his hands while it was going off in 2017 and actively chose to put a pillow over his head.
That is a flawless analogy for inquiry notice. The moment Musk admitted he received the term sheet detailing the for-profit conversion, the very core of his fraud allegation, he handed the defense an inescapable, on-the-record admission that he was on inquiry notice in August 2017.
Wow.
A reasonably prudent person handed a document outlining a $10 billion for-profit conversion of their philanthropic project would have read it. Therefore, under California law, he knew about the conversion in 2017.
So that firmly establishes the mechanism. Suspicion or even access to suspicious documents starts the countdown clock.
Yes, immediately.
If you get a document outlining the fraud, the clock starts that day, regardless of whether you read it. But this leads to the most critical question of the entire deep dive.
Which is?
If this is a game of rigorous timelines, we need to know the exact dates. When exactly did Musk's smoke detector start beeping?
And this brings us to the factual timeline. what the presiding judge refers to as the inquiry notice pile.
The pile.
It is a methodical, devastating timeline of suspicion that the defense team has meticulously built to prove the clock expired years ago.
I want to explore this timeline not just as a list of dates, but as a story of escalation. Because the newsletter details this based on the pretrial summary judgment order, docket 390. And the escalation of Musk's own suspicion is glaring. It starts way back in 2017. According to Musk's own deposition testimony, he admitted that in 2017, he started to suspect that he was being swindled.
Stop right there and apply the Jolly standard we just discussed.
Okay.
The trigger is suspicion. Musk literally used the word suspect under oath to describe his psychological state in 2017. He suspected he was being swindled, and he took financial action based on that suspicion. The clock is officially started.
Because he completely stopped his $5 million quarterly contribution to OpenAI based on that suspicion. But the escalation doesn't stop with him just closing his checkbook. Let's look at the behavior that follows. September 15, 2017. Jared Burchell, acting at Musk's direction, officially registers a competing Delaware public benefit corporation.
A competitor.
Just 5 days later, September 20, 2017, Musk fires off a highly emotional email to Sam Altman and Greg Brockman. The quote is, "Guys, I've had enough. This is the final straw."
Look at those actions objectively. Registering a competing corporate entity and declaring the final straw to your partners. Does that sound like the behavior of a man who is blissfully unaware of any structural issues?
Not at all.
Or does that sound like a man who is highly suspicious, deeply aggrieved, and taking active defensive measures?
It is entirely the latter. You don't set up a rival company unless you strongly suspect the relationship you are currently in is fundamentally broken.
Right.
Then the timeline moves forward. November 6, 2017. The defense introduces Greg Brockman's own personal notes, which reveal deep internal turmoil and hesitation about committing to the nonprofit structure.
Yeah, the morally bankrupt comment.
Yes. Brockman writes that it would be morally bankrupt to convert without Musk. Fast forward to March 11th, 2019. OpenAI officially announces their capped profit LP structure to the entire world.
A huge public announcement.
And finally, September 24, 2020. Musk publicly tweets to his millions of followers, OpenAI is essentially captured by Microsoft.
That is not just a smoke detector. That is an entire mountain of inquiry notice.
Yeah, that's a 5-alarm fire.
Every single one of those events, from the stopped payments to the public tweets, is a blaring alarm under California law.
So let's run the actual math here. Let's look at the legal arithmetic. What does this timeline of escalation actually mean for the survival of his lawsuit? Because the hard date we have to work from is August 5, 2024.
The day he filed.
That is the day he filed this federal complaint. So where does that leave us?
To do the arithmetic accurately, we have to understand a concept the newsletter refers to as the gravamen rule. Yes. In California, different types of lawsuits have different statutory countdown clocks. For instance, under Code of Civil Procedure 338-day, a lawsuit that is fundamentally based on fraud has a strict 3-year time limit.
Okay, 3 years for fraud.
There is also a secondary catch-all statute, Section 343, which offers a slightly longer 4-year limit for claims that don't fit neatly into other categories.
But Musk isn't explicitly suing for basic fraud, right? His primary claim is breach of fiduciary duty. How does the court decide which clock applies to that?
That is exactly where the concept of the gravamen comes into play. Gravamen essentially means the true weight or the core essence of the legal grievance.
The heart of the matter.
Exactly. The court refuses to be blinded by whatever creative label a plaintiff's lawyer slaps onto a complaint. The judge will look at the underlying facts.
Oh, I see.
The newsletter cites case law, specifically the Thompson and Leon cases, which establish that when the core essence, the gravamen of a fiduciary breach claim, relies on allegations of concealed self-dealing or constructive fraud.
Then what happens?
The courts trend heavily toward applying the shorter, stricter 3-year limit.
Okay, let's run the math on both scenarios just to be incredibly thorough. Let's assume the judge applies the strict 3-year limit. If the federal complaint was filed on August 5, 2024, the court can only look back 3 years.
Correct.
That means any wrong committed or discovered prior to August 5, 2021 is legally dead in the water.
The door is totally closed on anything before August 2021.
And let's say Musk's legal team pulls off a phenomenal argument and convinces the judge to apply the more generous 4-year catch-all limit.
Okay, assuming they get the 4 years.
That still only rewinds the clock to August 5, 2020.
Right. Now, cross-reference those cutoff dates with the timeline of escalation you just walked us through.
Oh, the math isn't just bad, it's catastrophic. The 2017 swindled feeling, the 2017 term sheet he didn't read, the 2017 final straw email, the 2019 public capped profit announcement, even the September 2020 captured by Microsoft tweet.
Yeah.
Every single one of those massive trigger events happened well before either the 3-year or the 4-year cutoff.
It is a mathematical impossibility for him to win on the timeline.
Literally impossible.
Even if you grant him the absolute most generous interpretation of the law, the 4-year window, his own public tweet loudly accusing them of being captured by Microsoft happened a full month before that 4-year window even opened.
So how does he attempt to navigate this on the stand? Because surely he knows this.
He tried to spin it.
The newsletter notes, based on NPR transcripts, that earlier in the week, Musk tried to segment his relationship with OpenAI into phases.
Right.
He testified he was enthusiastically supportive from 2015 to 2017. Then he claimed he was just a little uncertain from roughly 2017 to 2022.
A little uncertain.
And he argues that the real actionable fraud, the looting the nonprofit phase, didn't happen until late 2022. He's clearly trying to argue that the clock shouldn't start until phase 3.
He is trying to sound reasonable and measured to a jury. I was just a little uncertain. I didn't know for sure until 2022.
Yeah.
But legally, under the doctrines we just explored, he is confessing to his own demise. A little uncertain is the exact psychological state that triggers the Jolly Standard. As Jack Russo points out in the analysis, the discovery rule absolutely does not require Musk to have been certain of the fraud.
It just needs suspicion.
Right. It does not require him to have known the precise corporate vehicles used or the exact dollar amounts being moved. It only requires that a reasonably prudent person would be suspicious.
And he just handed that to them.
And he sat on a witness stand and voluntarily testified that he was uncertain and suspicious for 5 entire years before bothering to file a lawsuit.
This brings up a massive strategic question for me.
Okay, what is it?
If the timeline is this mathematically devastating and the law is this clear, what in the world were his high-priced lawyers doing? He has some of the most expensive legal representation on the planet.
He does, yes.
Surely they looked at this timeline before filing a $150 billion suit. Did they not have some kind of massive legal theory to bypass this timeline entirely?
Well, they absolutely did. They had a very sophisticated legal strategy designed to neutralize the statute of limitations completely.
Okay, so what was it?
But this is where we get into the true architectural cage of this case. The reason this trial is doctrinally over is because the judge quietly dismantled and destroyed those escape routes before the jury was even selected.
This brings us to what the newsletter calls the pretrial concrete.
Yes.
The judge issued 2 critical pretrial orders, PTO3 and PTO4, that secretly built this cage, while the media was completely distracted by the sheer spectacle of the billionaires fighting.
They completely missed the real action.
Let's break these down thoroughly. First, pretrial order number 3, which was issued on March 31st, 2026. What exactly did this order do?
PTO3 was a lethal strike against Musk's biggest, most important legal workaround. His lawyers attempted to invoke a doctrine known as continuous accrual, or sometimes called a continuing violation.
I'm going to try to guess how this works. Let me use a subscription model analogy.
Sure.
If I sign a contract with a gym and they fraudulently overcharge my credit card by $50 every single month for 10 years,
okay,
I might not be able to sue them for the charges from 2014 because the statute of limitations expired.
Right.
But I can absolutely still sue them for the fraudulent charge they made yesterday because every time they bill me, it's a fresh violation that restarts the clock.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what his lawyers were trying to argue, that OpenAI's fraud was a monthly subscription?
That is exactly the concept. His legal team basically argued, look, OpenAI made an ongoing, perpetual commitment to humanity to remain a nonprofit. Therefore, every single day they operate as a closed for-profit entity, they are committing a brand new, fresh breach of that fundamental duty.
Wow. If the court had accepted that theory, the statute of limitations would essentially reset every single morning when the sun came up.
Precisely. He could sue them at any time, forever.
That is a brilliant legal theory. It's a golden ticket if it works. So why didn't it?
Because Judge Gonzalez-Rogers utterly rejected the application of it to these facts. The newsletter details how she utilized a major precedent called the RI case. Yes. The judge used RI to distinguish between 2 fundamentally different types of harm. The gym membership analogy you used, recurring monthly billing, is what the law considers a severable recurring obligation.
Okay, so each month is a new event.
But the judge ruled that OpenAI's alleged betrayal is not a recurring monthly obligation. The decision to convert from a nonprofit to a capped profit model, and the decision to close their AI models was a discrete, one-time alleged act of fraud. You cannot simply point to the continuing impact or your continuing unhappiness to keep the legal clock alive.
I see.
A broken promise is broken on the day it shatters. The fact that the pieces are still on the floor 5 years later doesn't mean the promise is breaking again every day.
That is a brutal realization. So the continuous violation fallback was totally obliterated. The escape hatch was welded shut on March 31st.
Completely welded shut.
But its pretrial order number 4, issued a few weeks later on April 17th, that Jack Russo calls the true death blow. He specifically refers to it as a directed verdict telegraph.
This is perhaps the most fascinating and complex procedural maneuver outlined in the entire newsletter. In PTO 4, the judge bifurcated the trial.
Let's explain bifurcation. That means splitting the trial into 2 distinct phases, correct?
Exactly right.
Like going to a restaurant. Phase 1 is arguing with the manager about whether the chef actually burned your steak. Phase 2 is negotiating whether you get a full refund or just a free dessert. But if you lose phase 1, you never even sit down for phase 2.
Exactly. The liability phase, deciding if OpenAI actually did anything legally wrong, happens first. The remedies phase, deciding what happens to the intellectual property and that massive $150 billion damages number, happens second. Furthermore, the judge imposed an incredibly strict time limit. She gave Musk exactly 22 hours total, OpenAI 22 hours, and Microsoft 5 hours. That includes every opening statement, every cross-examination, and every closing argument. It forces the lawyers to sprint through their cases.
But the real bombshell in PTO 4 isn't the time limit. It's who is actually making the final decision. Right?
Yes, because the remaining claims, in this case, the breach of charitable trust and unjust enrichment, are equitable claims.
Right, equity.
And under a major Supreme Court precedent called Grand Financiera, there is no Seventh Amendment constitutional right to a jury trial when you are strictly seeking equitable relief.
Wait, hold on. I need to stop you there. There is no right to a jury.
No right at all.
But they have a jury. The reporters are literally writing articles about the jury, laughing at the testimony in the gallery.
They have what is known as an advisory jury, which is convened under Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 39C1.
An advisory jury.
The judge exercised her discretion to seat a jury, to let them sit in the box, hear the evidence, and eventually render a verdict form.
Okay, but under Rule 52A1, because these are equitable claims, the judge herself remains the ultimate finder of fact. The jury's verdict is completely 100% non-binding. Are you serious? I am. The judge is perfectly free to look at their verdict, say, "Thank you for your advice," and then rule the exact opposite way.
That is wild. The jury isn't a jury at all. It's just a legally sanctioned focus group with a gavel.
That's a pretty accurate way to describe it. But here is the directed verdict telegraph that Russo highlights as the death blow.
Okay, what is it?
In PTO 4, Judge Gonzalez-Rogers didn't just quietly reserve her right to overrule them. She explicitly stated in her written order, if the jury finds that Musk failed to file his action within the statute of limitations, it is highly likely that the court will accept that finding and direct verdict to the defendants.
Let me make sure I am fully comprehending the weight of that sentence. A directed verdict, specifically under Rule 50, is basically the judicial equivalent of the referee stepping into the boxing ring and stopping the fight, right?
It means the judge looks at the room and says, "The law leaves no room for debate here. I am taking this out of everyone's hands and unilaterally declaring a winner."
That is exactly what a Rule 50 directed verdict is.
So she is telling the lawyers in writing before opening statements even happen. If this advisory focus group says the clock ran out based on the timeline, I'm going to agree with them, invoke Rule 50, and instantly end this $150 billion case. We will never see a remedies phase. Game over.
She is publicly committed to dropping the hammer, provided the jury gives her the factual excuse to do it.
Okay, this leaves a massive strategic hole that I need you to fill.
All right, shoots.
If the judge has the ultimate power to decide, and she has already looked at the timeline we just discussed, the 2017 emails, the competing corporation, the absolute mathematical impossibility of the statute of limitations.
Yeah, she knows all that.
And she has already telegraphed how she's going to rule. Why are we even having a trial? Why force hundreds of lawyers, witnesses, and journalists into a federal courtroom for 49 hours of high-stress testimony?
It seems like a waste of time.
Why not just dismiss the case on summary judgment 3 months ago and save everyone the time and millions in legal fees?
That is the ultimate procedural question. Why go through the motions of a trial if the ending is written? There are 2 primary, highly strategic reasons for this.
Okay, what's the first?
First, preserving the record for appeals. The judge knows that whatever she decides, a case involving $150 billion and the most powerful tech figures in the world is going straight to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals.
And almost certainly to the Supreme Court.
Undoubtedly. If she simply dismisses it prematurely on summary judgment, there is a significantly higher risk of an appellate court overturning her.
Oh, I see.
They might say, you acted too hastily, there were factual disputes about exactly what Musk knew and when he knew it, and you should have let a trial play out.
By holding the trial, she forces Musk to take the witness stand. She forces him to say under oath, I didn't read the fine print, and I was a little uncertain. She takes a disputed, messy paper timeline and turns it into concrete sworn testimony.
Precisely. Once he admits those things under cross-examination, the factual timeline is officially cemented into the court record. The appellate court cannot easily overturn a judge's ruling when the plaintiff himself confessed to the facts supporting it on the stand.
That's brilliant. What's the second reason?
The second reason is that an advisory jury verdict provides her ruling with immense practical and political cover.
Cover?
Yes. It's one thing for a single federal judge to unilaterally dismiss a $150 billion lawsuit brought by the wealthiest man on earth.
Right. That looks like a huge power grab.
It is another thing entirely for her to dismiss it while saying, I am simply adopting the factual findings of a jury of your peers who listened to all the evidence.
That is brilliant judicial strategy. She is building an absolutely bulletproof fortress around her eventual ruling.
She really is.
But that brings us to the final, fascinating piece of the puzzle. If the defense lawyers, Wachtel, know that the judge is just waiting in the wings holding a loaded Rule 50 gun.
Right.
And they know the advisory jury is essentially the trigger for that gun, how do they get the jury to pull the trigger? Because a jury of average citizens does not care about civil procedure.
They really don't.
They don't care about the intricacies of the Jolly Line or Section 330 AD. They care about human drama. They care about the story.
Exactly. You cannot win over a jury of lay people with a calendar and a calculator. You have to give them a compelling human narrative.
So what narrative did they use?
And that is where Wachtel's overarching trial strategy comes into play. The newsletter refers to their narrative framework as the sour grapes strategy.
Sour grapes. Okay, I assume that means they are trying to paint Musk as a sore loser.
Basically, yes.
But how does convincing a jury that someone is a sore loser legally restart or stop a complex statute of limitations clock?
Well, it doesn't change the clock mathematically,
Really?
but it changes the jury's willingness to enforce the clock.
Ah, I see.
The defense framed their entire opening statement and their entire aggressive cross-examination strategy around a very specific emotional arc. They painted a picture for the jury. Elon Musk wasn't tragically betrayed. He isn't a selfless crusader for open-source AI trying to save humanity.
Right.
Instead, they methodically showed that Musk launched his own AI company, xAI, in 2023. They showed he incorporated it as a standard for-profit C corporation.
Highlighting his pursuit of massive venture funding.
Yes. And according to the defense's story, Musk only suddenly decided to sue OpenAI when its massive commercial success became deeply inconvenient to his own competitive ambitions.
Which ties perfectly back into the distillation admission we talked about at the beginning.
Exactly.
You aren't a betrayed donor. You're a competitor who is actively siphoning our tech to train your own trillion-dollar profit-making machine.
Yes. The narrative they are weaving is pure sour grapes. You aren't suing us for justice. You're just mad that we are winning the AI race.
But again, I have to ask how that emotional narrative actually connects back to the dry legal doctrine. Making him look petty and hypocritical is fun courtroom theater. But how does it force the jury to check the box on the timeline?
Because it completely destroys the fundamental archetype of the diligent plaintiff. Remember the Mangini standard?
The reasonably prudent person.
Right. The legal requirement that a plaintiff must actively investigate when they become suspicious. Musk desperately needs the jury to view him as a trusting, altruistic founder who was slowly, tragically deceived over many years by his friends and who heroically rushed to file a lawsuit the very moment he uncovered the true extent of the fraud.
Right. He needs to be the hero who just figured out the villain's plot.
But the sour grapes narrative annihilates that heroic persona. By framing him as a ruthless trillion-dollar competitor experiencing after-the-fact market regret, it anchors the jury's perspective exactly where the defense needs it.
Telling the jury he isn't a victim.
It tells the jury, He isn't a victim. He knew exactly what we were doing all along. He got the term sheet in 2017. He sent the final straw email. He tweeted about Microsoft in 2020.
He knew they were for profit, and he didn't care at all.
Exactly. He only suddenly cared and filed a lawsuit when it started affecting his bottom line in 2023.
Wow. They're literally weaponizing his own immense business success and market savvy against his timeline. They're making it impossible for the jury to believe he was naively in the dark.
Exactly. Every single minute, the defense spends talking about xAI's trillion-dollar valuation, or his $97 billion bid to buy OpenAI's IP, or him admitting to distillation, is a minute spent making the jury view him as a cynical competitor rather than a betrayed victim. And a jury that views the plaintiff as a hypocritical competitor is a jury that is perfectly happy, even eager, to check the box on the verdict form that says, yes, he knew about this more than 3 years ago, and he sat on his hands.
And the very moment the jury checks that specific box on the verdict form,
the judge invokes Rule 50. She officially accepts the finding, and the $150 billion case vanishes into thin air.
Wow.
The trapdoor opens. As Russo brilliantly writes in the conclusion of his analysis, every minute Wachtell spends building the inquiry notice record is a minute spent constructing the directed verdict record under Rule 50A.
This is truly a masterclass. You know, for you listening right now, whether you are prepping for a corporate boardroom negotiation, studying for the bar exam, or if you are just endlessly fascinated by human behavior and strategy, this is the ultimate lesson in high-stakes maneuvering.
It really is.
It is not about the fiery, passionate speech you give in the spotlight. It's about aligning the emotional narrative of the room with the cold, hard, inescapable math of the procedural rules. Wachtell didn't just tell a good story to entertain the gallery. They told the exact, highly calibrated story required to trigger a specific legal trapdoor that the judge had secretly installed weeks earlier.
It's the perfect synthesis of courtroom theater and legal engineering. The trial itself is just the formality of locking a cage that was entirely built in the pretrial motions.
Which brings us to the end of this incredible deep dive. Let's do a quick recap to solidify the architecture we just uncovered.
Good idea.
The dramatic headlines of Day 4, Elon Musk admitting to distillation, admitting under oath that he didn't read the fine print of a $10 billion term sheet. Those moments were certainly embarrassing for him on a massive public stage.
Very embarrassing.
But they merely put a human face on a legal reality that was already decided 6 weeks prior. Pretrial orders 3 and 4, which eliminated continuous accrual and set up the advisory jury, combined with a brutal, mathematically impossible 2017 trigger date, had already built an inescapable cage of civil procedure around his lawsuit.
A cage he couldn't break out of.
Day 4 didn't decide the case. Day 4 just handed the advisory jury the key to lock it.
The architecture is always built before the jury is ever seated. The paperwork precedes the performance.
And that leaves us with a final lingering thought for you to ponder. We just spent an hour seeing how the entire architecture of a $150 billion trial was quietly cemented in boring pretrial motions, obscure civil procedure rules, and rigid statutes of limitations long before the first dramatic opening statement was ever made to the public.
Exactly.
So the next time you turn on the news, or the next time you see a massive, highly publicized battle playing out in business, in politics, or in the media, ask yourself, how much of the drama you are watching is just performative theater?
It's a great question to ask.
How many of these epic, supposedly world-changing public showdowns are merely actors playing out a script where the ending, the real outcome, was already written months ago in the fine print?
It definitely changes how you consume the daily news. You stop looking at the actors and start looking for the stagehands.
It really does. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Always look for the structural realities beneath the daily headlines. We'll catch you in the next one.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.